Yo, this is my little series where I just talk about my experiences getting back into Magic the Gathering this year and the weirdness of doing it through Magic the Gathering Arena because it's so different from casually playing paper Magic with your friends. It's way more competitive and faceless and weird and like a video game, but not a very good video game, because it's so random and it's crazy. And this is kind of pointless because this is not a popular series. Nobody really listens to this. I've got a podcast feed where I'm reading this book I wrote about The Last of Us, and in between chapters I post video game stuff. And it's kind of popular. It's got quite a few subscribers. But I only put one of these Magic episodes in that feed because it's just so niche and so specific. And if you don't know Magic the Gathering, there's only so much I feel like I can toss that on people. So what I'm left with is this little side series on YouTube that nobody cares about. But I just want to talk about Magic, so fuck it. I'll just do it to myself and the 3 people that'll listen to this. Hello, by the way. Fancy meeting you here. So a big part of this series has been that I tilt a lot. I get mad at Magic, and it's a little shocking. It's I'm disappointed in myself that I don't know how to stop getting angry. I used to get mad at video games as a kid, but I kind of got over it, mostly by just playing less video games or knowing when to walk away. Something about Magic just makes me nuts. And that happened way too much. It finally hit peak insanity. Where I've talked before about how I play a lot of Orzhov, a lot of black-white Loris decks. A lot of it is just that's the mana base I've got. It's a big issue with Magic the Gathering Arena. Sorry, I got a little walking stick while I walk in the snow, so you can hear walking stick noise. But an issue with the Magic the Gathering Arena economy is all the good lands are rares, and it's so hard to get rare cards that the only color I've got all the land I need for, all the pathways, all the temples, all the shocklands, is black-white. So I've been leaning toward black-white a lot. And I've been playing this Loris deck with Hateful Eidolons, and I moved into Historic because you can have SRAM, the Senior Artificer, and Kaya's Ghost Form. Incredibly important. It's insane, because Ghost Form brings back creatures even if they've been exiled. And then if it's a Ghost Form on a Loris, then you can just recast the Ghost Form from your graveyard. And it's unbelievable how resilient that can be. Somebody can drop an Ugin and wipe the whole board, and my little Loris will survive. And then next turn I can toss a Demonic Embrace on him and kill the fucking Ugin. And I've come back from many games where crazy shit is happening. Just multiple Nicol Bolas planeswalkers and just insane world-shattering shit happening, and my little tiny Loris with a little bit of backup can just weather it all and come through for a win. It's nuts. So that was really impressive that the little band in vintage Dreamcat that could. Obviously Loris is one of the most powerful cards in Magic, but still it's crazy that this little 3-drop can survive some of this shit. But my deck is still very creature focused, because a lot of the early game especially is just hoping that I can kill the other guy's creature with enchantment based removal so that I can draw with my Eidolons and my SRAM. So if I play against creatureless decks, a lot of times I'm just stuck with all these cards that do nothing. And if I try to sideboard, suddenly I'm just trying to sideboard to a whole different strategy that was never what the shell of the deck was intended to do in the first place. So it just doesn't work. And it was just really frustrating. And specifically, I just played this one day against this deck that was only planeswalkers. So all my creature removal was useless, and I just couldn't touch these planeswalkers, and it was just so annoying and so frustrating. And I finally just had enough. I'm I can't keep getting mad at this game. I can't do it anymore. So I deleted Magic Arena, and I didn't play for 3 weeks. Because a lot of it is, you just get caught in that little loop of like, well, I got to do my daily stuff to get my little daily gold to build up for these wild cards and stuff. It just feels like something you have to do, and it was just so not fun anymore. So I let it go. I thought maybe this would be it for good. Because I talked last time about how Magic is clearly like an addiction to me. It feels very much like an addiction. And it felt that way to quit it too. It's like, well, my life is better. There's no doubt that it's better. I'm not getting angry anymore. Nothing else in life is that bad. Like, part of the big philosophy of Magic is like, hey, you win some, you lose some. But the irony is that in real life, you don't have to really lose any. Life's not that hard in some ways. Day to day, it's like, hey, look all the stuff I'm accomplishing. I'm writing a novel and putting out podcasts. I'm doing things. Going on little hikes through the snowy woods. You can actually win every day. You don't have to lose some in real life. Not the way you do in Magic. In Magic, like I've said before, the best ever decks are like 60% win rate, and they always have a deck or two that they get trounced by. Like, you just have to lose all the time in Magic, no matter how good you are. And I'm not that great. Medium at best. So, this like, hey, you win some, you lose some. Only in Magic. Magic fucking sucks, dude. It's brutal, and it's really not fair. Which again is just, it's fine if you're playing with people and you're just playing for fun with your friends. It's like, hey, it's a fun game. It's neat. There's all this cool stuff that can happen. But when you play it as a video game, it's so frustrating. So I had that little emptiness where I'm like, man, I'm not getting my little Magic fix anymore. This kind of sucks, but it's clearly for the best. It's clearly better. And I thought maybe that was it. Maybe that was the end of my Magic journey. And like I said, I didn't play for 3 weeks, and it was a good thing to do. I think taking time off is a very good thing to do. I will probably do it again in the future. But eventually, the new set came out. Kaldheim. Everyone was talking about it and all the new cards. And I was listening to, I also like kind of cut out podcasts and YouTube channels and stuff. I only listen to like the very tippity-toppity, my very favorite Magic stuff. Because whenever I listened to it, it would be like an alcoholic listening to a fucking podcast about whiskey or something. When I listen to people talk about Magic, it flared up my desire to go play Magic. It was just easier to go cold turkey, to just not do it. But the 2 or 3 things I stuck with, they're talking about Kaldheim, they're talking about the new cards, and I'm like, oh man, I really want to get in on this. I want to play with these new cards. I want to try it out. I took my time off. It was a good thing to do. I'm proud of myself for being able to do that. So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's get back into Magic. Let's try it again. And it's been going better. I really only had one day where I woke up kind of early. I was overtired. Same old story as before too. It's just I was doing really well the day before. So I had expectations, and expectations are the killer. It's like, I had a good run yesterday. This deck was doing good yesterday. But then the next morning, I had a bad run because, of course, it's a random ass game. It's going to happen. And I was overtired. And it's that same feeling I had before where I just got frustrated in this horrible way that I couldn't stop. It's just like, God damn. Where it's like I stopped playing. I turned off the game. I went and did something else. But I just stayed mad for way too long. It's like, oh, fuck. I can't believe it. Here I am. Dumb junkie back here again. But luckily, like, that only happened once. So it's just like, okay, just don't play when you're tired. Don't do it. Since then, it's been a couple of weeks, probably about 3 weeks, I've been back into Magic, and I only really had that one time. So I still think the break really helped. Things are just going better. But that potential is still there. I still gotta watch myself. I gotta be careful. Because that's just such a horrible feeling. I just don't want to let things get out of hand like that over a dumbass game. It's fucking stupid. But anyway, now that I'm back in, let me just blab about, because I just think it's so neat, this new deck that I came up with, where I'm starting to kind of get a better sense of the scope of Magic. Like modern day Magic, it's a lot different from back in the day when I played in the late 90s. It's a lot crazier, a lot more bombastic and insane, particularly lately. People have talked a lot about how these last couple of years, there's a lot of the modern cards are giving the old cards a run for their money. They're just overpowered and insane, you know? But anyway, I was doing the lures thing again because, like, of all the cards in Kaldheim, the one I was excited about was this dumb common called Wither Crown, because it's another enchantment removal. It just reduces the creature's power to 0, and then it deals 1 damage to their controller every turn unless they sack the creature. And I'm like, oh cool, for standard that's something I can put in my Lurrus deck to try to make up for the lack of ghost forms. But nothing makes up for the lack of ghost form. Without ghost form, that deck just sucked. It just wasn't working. And I didn't have SRAM either. So I would just, like, without the little Eidolons, I just had nothing. And it was like not a very great strategy to begin with. And it's so hard to just hope you get one of these 4 cards in your deck. You know, I've got nothing without that. Not nothing, I mean, it's still a good deck. It had Seasoned Hallow Blades and Lurrus, and you know, it's an okay deck. But I couldn't really get a card draw engine going without the stupid Eidolons, and it just wasn't happening. Without SRAM as a backup plan, it's like, shit, this is just annoying. This is not working at all. And the Wither Crown is actually really annoying. It really sucks, because if it turned a creature's power to 0 no matter what, then maybe. But it just turns their base power to 0. So if they are enchanted with something or have +1/+1 counters, or there's like a million ways that a creature can still have power despite a Wither Crown. So it's like, man, this is just not worth the effort. This thing is like, there's so many cases where it doesn't work. And it's a dumb common anyway. No one in the world was excited about that except me, because I just need enchantment removal. So I switched gears entirely. The other card that I thought was neat was Tybalt's Trickery, which is this red counterspell, but it's not really a counterspell. It's like a Chaos Warp. Whatever they cast, it counters that spell, but then gives them another random spell from their deck. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse. But I thought that was cool, because I've played quite a bit of mono red. My first good deck was mono red, and I still have like a really good historic mono red deck. Mono red is the other thing beyond Orzhov that I'm pretty well set up on. I got 4 Dreadhorde Arcanists, I got 4 Young Pyromancers, Bomat Courier, Kari Zev. My mono red deck is, you know, about as reasonable as a mono red deck's gonna get. I got all the rares, I got all the mythics, I got all this stuff. The problem with mono red is it's all or nothing. Either you really win fast in an early blitz, or you're dead, you got nothing. So that's where I thought Tybalt's Trickery would be cool, because maybe it'll save you right at the end, you know, like if somebody casts a board sweeper, or somebody casts a big life gain spell. Like, it's pretty common with mono red that all they gotta do is just do the one big thing on turn 5 or 6 that fucks up your whole plan, and then that's it. There's no coming back with mono red. There is no backup plan. There's no secondary strategy, which is why I don't really like mono red all that much. But I thought, oh man, with this thing, like, maybe that's all I need. They cast a board sweeper. If I could just stop that, if I could just stop that one thing, maybe that's all I need to win. And Tybalt's Trickery has been really controversial, because people have been playing it the opposite way. They haven't been using it to counter their opponent's spells. They've been making these dumb decks where they cast their own 0 cost spell, counter it, turn 2, and then just hope that they play something insane, that they get an early Ugin, or an Ultimatum, or an Ulamog. And it's kind of dumb, and I hope that Tybalt's Trickery doesn't get banned just because of this nonsense, because I'm using it the proper way, and I think it's really neat. These people are ruining everything for everyone. It's just so dumb. It's so degenerate and nonsensical. But I've been playing it as intended, and what's cool is, so my standard mono red deck, it's definitely not as good as the historic one, But I was trying a different thing, where I was playing with relic robbers, these guys who, if they get through, they give your opponent a little useless creature who deals damage each turn. And then I put in, oh man, what's this card called? Roiling Vortex, maybe? It's from Zendikar Rising. It's an enchantment that each turn it deals a damage to that player. On my turn I take a damage, on their turn they take a damage. And I can pay a red to keep them from gaining life. So the idea was just if I can get in with some early relic robbers and some roiling vortexes and then just stabilize the board a little, it just pings the opponent to death faster than it pings me to death. It's not a very good strategy, especially against other aggro decks. It's like I'm just killing myself. But it's so neat against these decks that just gum up the board and just sit around and wait. You know, like, what's that sky noodle thing called? Not Yorvo. Yorvo's the green creature. It's funny, this thing's so famous, and I play against it all the time, but I've never played with it. Yorion. The Sky Nomad or whatever. It's great against those decks because they just gum up the board and just fuck around, and it's so bizarre how they even manage to beat you, because it feels like they're not doing anything and then you've lost. It's very frustrating. So it was the only time that I was glad to see that their companion was Yorion, because it's like, ah, cool, that guy's gonna dirtle around for a while, but I'll set up this situation where he's getting pinged, and then, hey man, take all the time you want. And it was remarkably effective. So pretty stupid deck, but kind of fun. Weird thing to try. So I dusted off that deck and I put in the Tybalt's Trickeries, because I'm like, man, this will be even better. I'll start fucking with them, and then when they cast their Yorion, I'll Tybalt's Trickery it into something else. And whatever they get, like, who cares? Their whole deck is just full of weird nonsense that they blink with Yorion. I was confident that it would work, it would be cool. But what I didn't expect, it did work okay, but this happened completely by accident, and I haven't seen anyone else do this. I've never run into another deck doing this. I think it's kind of my discovery, which is silly to say. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people playing this fucking game. I'm sure someone is doing it. But the Roiling Vortex has this rules line that I didn't even really notice or pay attention to, that beyond pinging people and stopping life gain, if someone casts a spell without paying for it, it deals them 5 damage. I'm not even sure when that would come up. You know, it's a pretty rare situation. I guess there's ways, but I can't think of like an archetype that consistently does that. It's not like a big problem. But I had a Roiling Vortex out, and I cast Tybalt's Trickery on my opponent's spell, and it got shuffled up and he got a new spell. And he decided to cast it, whatever it was. And then the Roiling Vortex triggered, and it said, hey buddy, you just cast that spell without paying for it. Take 5 damage. And I was as surprised as my opponent was. It's like, what the fuck? Like, I had this deck anyway, I was just doing this. I was gonna do this no matter what, but this extra synergy was like, whoa. You know, there's not a lot of decks casting cards for free necessarily. But with this Tybalt's Trickery thing, I'm leading them into a situation where they're going to cast a spell without paying for it. And it's such an obscure rules interaction that they probably don't even realize it's going to happen. So that became this alternate strategy that was like crazy, where I'd have like a couple of Roiling Vortexes out if I could, and I might not even be doing that good. There's a good chance that the vortex is hurting me more than it's hurting them, and I'm almost dead. But especially having one of them out is great. Having 2 is insane, because there's so many games where I'm like, oh man, I'm done for. This is looking bad. But if they cast a spell and I Tybalt's Trickery it, then they get something else. And if they accept it and they're like, yeah, okay, I'll cast that, boom, boom, suddenly they took 10 points of damage and they're oftentimes dead. And they don't know what the fuck just happened. It's fucking insane. It's so crazy. And it's like still a very janky, silly deck, but man, just so cool. When it worked, it really worked. And I stumbled across this completely by accident. I didn't think about this interaction. I didn't know this was going to happen. I just happened to be doing this silly thing anyway, and this happened. So it was just neat. What a neat thing. And people walk into it all the time. Nobody realizes this is going to happen to them. And it's so brutal. So that started leading me down some pathways of like, I just haven't really played Blue since I got back in. But I realized how much I love Tybalt's Trickery, even without this Vortex shit. Just being able to counter that crucial spell really felt good. It's like I felt so much less at the mercy of what my opponents were doing. Because there's oftentimes it really is just one crucial moment. If you can just delay that one moment, you're all right. I started thinking about how could I squeeze Tybalt's Trickery into other decks that don't necessarily have red. And I realized like that's silly. What am I doing? Why am I thinking about how to get the red counterspell into stuff? Why don't I just make a deck with actual counterspells, you know? I forgot about the joy of counterspells. I just haven't done that since I've been back into the game. So as an experiment, I made an Esper deck. Blue, black, and white. And it just pretty quickly evolved into creatureless shit. The same thing I got mad about back when I quit last month. But it really is a neat thing to try. I was still in standard, and it's like, man, there really is a great advantage to having no creatures in your deck. Because I just had a few little creatures here and there. I'll just put in this little guy or this little guy. But they just take all of the wrath, you know, as soon as there's one creature. Everything your opponent has been waiting to use, every creature removal spell, just goes straight to this thing. There's a lot to be said for like, just don't have any creatures. Don't have anything. It just blanks out so much of what your opponent's doing. And it made me understand these frustrating control mages a little better. This really is a viable strategy. So I just played this kind of slow, ponderous, annoying deck where it's nothing but removal and sweepers and card draw. And like, let's just try to get to Kiora Best the Sea God or Ugin. Really, that was it. Let's just try to get to one of those and hope that that's enough to end the game, which it oftentimes is. So I did that for a while. I didn't really love it. But it was just an experiment. It's like, okay, this is kind of neat. Try this other end of Magic where I'm always on the low end, you know? I'm playing these little Lurrus Eidolon decks where I'm just like mixing it up down on the ground with all the other creatures. But if there's no creatures, it's tough. Or red decks, which are the definition of low to the ground. There's nowhere to go for them. There is no late game for most of these decks. So it was nice to try. But I didn't want to make this my identity as a Magic player because it just wasn't interesting to me. Even when I won, I'm like, man, this is just weird. It's useful, it's neat to experiment with, but I'm just fucking with this game. Like, yeah, let's just not have creatures. Let's just, you know, blech. So I went back to trying my little Lurrus deck in Standard. And like I said, just the Eidolons were not enough. Without SRAM, I needed some kind of backup. But the other color I had kind of avoided is green. It's funny, blue-green is the best color in modern Magic, especially together. Like, they're the best. And ironically, they're the two I mostly ignored. So I had all these random cards in my collection I'd never really played and stuff. But I'm like, didn't someone mention with green that there's a guy, Setessan Champion? Do I have one of those? That draws a card whenever you cast an enchantment. Like, that kind of fits. That's very similar to SRAM. Maybe instead of black-white, even though I don't have the mana base and all the cool lands for black-green, let's see what I got. And it turns out I did have a Setessan Champion, and I happen to have one rare wild card, because rare is always where I get bottlenecked. So I made one more, and I'm like, okay, that's two. That's enough to test this out, just to see if it's gonna work. But I was looking around and I'm like, what else can I put in this deck? And I noticed I had these things called Nessian Wanderers, I think, that are lower rarity, and they don't draw a card when you cast an enchantment. They just let you look at your top 3 cards, and if one of them is a land, put it in your hand. And I'm like, all right, that's not as good, but that's not nothing. That's still useful. And it's still something I can do with my enchantments, with all my Myers Grasps and Dead Weights and Mogus's Favor. And instead of the Wither Crown, I realized Inevitable End, which was one of my favorite cards anyways, just fun. I'm like, oh yeah, how come I never thought to use that before? It's also an enchantment, and it can take out anything. Doesn't matter how big it is, you put that on there, and eventually Inevitable End is going to get it. Where it's the one where people have to sacrifice a creature each turn. So they don't have to sacrifice the thing you enchanted. They can delay the inevitable, but eventually it's coming. And with the Eidolon, you draw cards when things die with your enchantments. It's cool with these green ones. Again, they're similar to SRAM. You just got to cast it. It's just got to enter the battlefield, and you get the card then. So I'm like, all right, let's give this a shot. Oh, and there's also, what's the guy's name? He's not in my deck anymore, but I used him for a while. Cheville, Bane of Monsters. Again, I just had a couple of these of this guy, because I just get these random cards from playing that I just toss in my collection and never think about. He's a little awkward because he has to come into play, he has to wait around a turn, he has to target a creature, but then when you kill that creature, you get 3 life and a card. So all of a sudden, it's like, wow, this deck is working. This dumb deck that I love playing, this enchantment creature killing deck, I don't have to worry about just my Eidolons, because now I've got 4 Eidolons, 2 Chevilles, 2 Setessan Champions, and 4 Nessun Wanderers. I'm gonna get somebody. I'm gonna have an early play. I don't have to mulligan myself to death. There's gonna be something I can do. And right away, the deck was super effective. I was like, man, this is really working. This is really cool. My dumb little strategy is working okay. And what I noticed is these Nessun Wanderers, man, those are like, they're the secret sauce. They're what kind of led me to where I'm at now, where every enchantment I put into play, they potentially draw me a land. The Eidolon itself is an enchantment creature, so it triggers the Nessun Wanderer. Binding the Old Gods is a really popular removal enchantment saga thing from Kaldheim, so I tossed some of those in. It's an enchantment, so it sets off the Nessun Wanderer / Setessan Champion. And part of its saga is that it also grabs a land. So basically I was just ending up with mountains of land. Unless I really get fucked right at the start, as long as I can get things rolling a little bit, I had remarkable amounts of land. Just land all over the place. I'm like, what do I do with all this land? Like, my deck is okay if I just want to get down and dirty and battle another creature deck. I have an okay chance. But then in the late game, I got nothing to do, and I've got land everywhere, like discarding like 4 land out of my hand because I can't even hold them and I can't play them in time. And it's like, this is an absurd amount of land. What do I do with this? So one idea was Scoot Swarm, which again, it's like, do I have one? It's surprising how many cards I just have and I don't realize I have. Unfortunately, I don't. So I haven't been able to experiment with the Scoot Swarm because I don't have the rare wild card to craft one. And I don't think I'm gonna. I've got too many other things I want to craft. And I'm annoyed by them. You know, I hate when other people play Scoot Swarm decks and make a zillion Scoot Swarms. I don't really want to be that person, you know? Like with this too, I was like, well, you know, I got all this mana. I could craft a Great Henge and put a Great Henge in here because I fucking hate the Great Henge. I lose so many games to Great Henge and Into the Story are my 2 least favorite cards in Standard. So I'm like, I just don't want to do it. Like, even if the Great Henge would be good, and I don't have a lot of big creatures to reduce its casting cost, but I can just hard cast that fucking thing. I've got so much land. But I'm not going to do it. I just can't do it. There's these cards that I just feel like are ludicrously not fair. Great Henge is so unfair. I've lost so many games just because of the Great Henge. And it's supposed to be, you know, hard to cast because it's expensive. But it's not, because it gets reduced by your biggest creature. That whole fucking thing of just like, they play a fucking Lovestruck Beast and I can easily get rid of their 1/1. So the beast is just kind of sitting there doing nothing, but he just allows them to cast their Great Henge for cheap. I mean, you all, you know what I'm talking about. You've all faced it down a million times. It's bullshit. Fucking Eldraine. What a nonsense set. So I just didn't want to do it. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. If I really hate this card, I'm not going to add to the problem. I just think it's a degenerate Magic card. It's fucking bullshit. I wish it wasn't part of the game. But it's a weird conversation to get into, right? Because everybody's got their different lines. What do they consider a ridiculous, degenerate card? You ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different answers. Into the Story and Great Henge I just find so frustrating because they're just so, again, like, it's because of the cost reduction, right? Like, same thing with Into the Story. Into the Story would be a fine card if you had to naturally wait until your opponent had 8 cards in the graveyard, or 7, or whatever it is. But because of rogues and milling, it's so easy to cast. It's just like the easiest in the world. And it's just like, fuck, I've lost so many games again because of that. However, what I'm about to describe could easily be seen as super degenerate nonsense also. But okay, I got this deck that it's basically a low to mid-level creature deck, right? Where I'm casting my creatures, I'm mixing it up with their creatures. Mogus's Favor is really neat because it's +2, -1. So if they have an X1, you can use it as a removal spell, which happens surprisingly often. But if I'm on the offensive, a Nessun Wanderer or a Hateful Eidolon can just wear that thing and not be killed by it and generate some card advantage because it's an enchantment. And it makes my little lame creatures that don't really do much damage, suddenly they do a little bit of damage. They're a bit of a problem. And it's just like, that's the kind of Magic I like. I like the lower end creature battles. To me, that's what Magic is. And I like that this deck does that. Because it was a little bit neat to try the control deck. And there's a lot of decks that just ramp. They just cultivate, you know, use green spells to just get a shitload of lands, zoom to the end game. And it's effective and it works, but I don't want to do that either because I don't want to play these creatureless things. I just don't think that's interesting. That's not the kind of Magic I want to play. I want to make this game kind of fun for myself. It's like I get super frustrated by losing, but I don't just want to win at all costs. I don't want to have a dumb Tybalt Yourself deck or just these weird creatureless decks. I just don't like that stuff. So this deck is cool because it's the creature battle stuff that I like. But what I stumbled into with these Nessun Wanderers is I also end up with all this mana, and suddenly it opens up the possibility of a big end game haymaker that just didn't really exist with my red deck or my Orzhov Lurrus deck. If those decks got to the end game where I've got 7, 8, 9, 10 mana, it was a goddamn miracle. Where this deck, it still took the requisite number of turns, you know, like I still was only playing 1 land a turn. The only ramp was Binding the Old Gods. I wasn't cultivating, I didn't put any Azusa Lost Seekings or anything in, but I really consistently had the land. It was really easy every single turn to play a land, which was just like so weird and so cool. I'm still playing the low mid-range game that I like, but I'm just building with this consistency and almost inevitability toward a potential big endgame play. So the first thing I did was Ugin, because I've got an Ugin. I don't know where I got it. I just randomly opened it in a pack ages ago. And I've talked before about how Ugin was one of those cards that when it was played against me, I was like, fucking Ugin, that's bullshit. But as I played with it, I started to respect it more because sometimes you just do need a game to end. When you're casting a spell that costs whatever it costs, fucking 8 mana, it's kind of reasonable that it's gonna fucking deal with shit. It's gonna kind of move this game forward. And it's not as strong as it seems. Like, Ugin at first seems insane. It just wipes everything. It's nuts. But like I was saying with that Lurrus deck, it's amazing how often you can work around Ugin. Ugin is not the be-all end-all. I mean, I've had times when I've worked around fucking Ulamog, which is insane. That guy's indestructible, destroys a bunch of your shit. sometimes I can get around him, you know? Ugin is almost not a problem. It's like a fun little puzzle. Can I get past this Ugin? And a lot of times it's possible. So I didn't feel too bad playing Ugin. And I'm like, all right, that's not bad. And the other card that I put in was, I was like, all right, this is a Golgari deck. Can I get some blue in this bad boy? Because I came to really love Kiora Best the Sea God. Actually, it's funny how I stumbled across that card. Again, it was just a card that I had, but I never used. It got used against me sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, that seems pretty good. It was actually because I had a Brawl deck where my commander was Cherix the Raging Isle, the 017 Crab. Really stupid deck, but kind of fun. And again, just a way to experiment with blue, with a color I didn't use much. But trying to use counter magic and stuff was kind of counterintuitive to that deck, because you wanted to use your mana to pump up Cherix. But again, I learned some weird techniques through that Cherix deck. Like, since he was the commander, I knew I was going to have him all the time. So I put in, man, what is that card called? The artifact that gives +1/+1 and lifelink and trample. I can't remember what it's called. Soul Spear, something like that? But I realized that really that was my best bet for winning with that stupid mono blue crab deck, was if I could get that equipment on my crab and then pump it up to like a fucking 8/9 or whatever, or a 16/1. You can do crazy shit with it. Just put in tons of land, try to hit all my land drops, pump up my crab, trample over people. It was remarkably effective. So I realized to just be, again, to learn these kind of degenerate strategies. If I just mulliganed over and over and over till I got the Soul Spear, I put it on my crab and I had a better than average chance of winning. So, I mean, that was a valuable lesson too, which I learned a bit with my red deck too, just mulliganing. The importance of mulliganing a bad hand instead of just like sticking with my garbage and trying to make it work. Very important lesson. Anyway, Kiora Best the Sea God was the other thing. It's like if I had a hand with that in it, and that deck had like 30 land. It had a lot of land. So that was a reasonable strategy too, is like, hey, I've got Kiora Best the Sea God. Let's just try not to die for 7 turns. And if I can hit 7 land drops, there's a good chance that this card by itself will win me the game. So I was like, all right, let's put that in here because I've got all the land in the world. And this was a neat experiment because I also have never really played 3 color. I never quite understood how to do it. It seemed like my mana was always just too fucked up and too inconsistent. But I was playing in thirds, like 1/3 of each color kind of thing. And this kind of taught me that seems like it's not the best way to play a 3-color deck. So instead I played Golgari with just a little bit, oh no, that's right. First, I put in Tibalt, the new Tibalt Cosmic Imposter, because it's a 2-drop black creature, no problem, fits right in the deck. But if I could get up to whatever he costs, I think he's also 7 mana, which I could pretty easily, how hard was it to splash enough red to be able to cast Tibalt? And it turns out not that hard at all. I've got just random dual lands of different kinds. Or worst case scenario, the Shimmerdrift Veil from Kaldheim, it's a common. Comes into play tapped, but you can pick any color. Surprisingly useful card. So yeah, I found out it was no problem at all to make sure I had a single red by the time I got up to Tibalt land. But I just didn't stick with that long because Tibalt just wasn't good enough. He did not end the game. Not the way an Ugin does. So I was like, all right, Kiora Best the Sea God is also 7. It costs 2 blue. This is going to be tougher. But let's get rid of Tibalt. Forget about the red. Let's go with blue instead. And yeah, I still found it surprisingly doable. And it was fun. It took me quite a long time to get the mana base sorted out. And part of it is that I don't have all the stuff that I wish I had. I don't have the perfect lands. But just dealing with what I've got. It's like, okay, I've got these black-green, and I've got these blue-green, and I got these black-blue. Let's mix them all together And that became like part of the fun of the deck. Is like, okay, I need a green right at the start, but really just one green and then I'm good to go. And I need 2 black because I got some things like Demonic Embraces or Blood on the Snow that just require 2 black. So let's try to make sure I got that. And then once I got that established, I've got the next few turns of just dicking around to hopefully get my 2 blue for a Cure of Best of Sea God. And I was like, I can do this like quite a bit of the time. And it's just kind of fun. It's an extra little layer that I got to pay attention to. That's one thing I've learned with this deck, is it's so good to have a deck that you find fun. Like, I sort of stumbled into this deck that does both the things that I like. Mainly in the early game, it's this fun little creatures battling creatures, low to the ground game of Magic. But then later on, you can hit a Nugan, you can hit a fucking Cure Best of Sea God. And doing the little extra math of the lands. So many of these lands come into play tapped, which is a bummer, but that's part of it too, is like, try to keep my land that comes in untapped for that crucial turn. And then the only other big haymaker I could find that seemed potentially on the level of Ugin and Kiara Best of Sea God was Craig's Plate Baloth or some shit. Again, it's just some fucking Zendikar card that I just had and I didn't realize that I had. That it's 6/6, you can't counterspell it, and it has hexproof for 7 mana, which isn't great, but if you can get to 10, it's a 10/10. Trample, uncounterable, hexproof. No, it doesn't have trample. I wish it had trample. I think it has haste. So I mean, it's not as brutal, but it's pretty good, you know? Pretty fucking good. Really hard to get up to 10 mana, but sometimes I can do it, and it's just cool, and it's green, it's easier to cast. But even stuff like, yeah, Kiara Best of Sea God, it's surprising how many times I'll get it 1 turn too late. Because when you first cast it, it doesn't do a lot. It's not till turn 2 that you can attack with your big sea creature and that it taps down all your opponent's creatures. They have a whole extra turn to do whatever they want. And a lot of times they can get out of it. But it's like fun. It's just like, once the game has reached this point, if I haven't won yet, which a lot of times I can win with the little creature shit, but if I haven't won yet and the game just needs to move on, I've got that in my pocket now. This deck can do both things, which I've never experienced before. And when I play against other people whose decks do this type of stuff, you know, usually they're creatureless ramp decks and they can usually get where they're going a lot faster than me. There's a good chance I'm still gonna die, but I have some kind of chance. You know, once it becomes this insane battle of nutso crazy spells that cost 1 million mana, we can still fight on that axis. I have access to that stuff. And I guess that's what's neat, is the scope of Magic, you know? Like, I felt it sometimes. Like I was saying, those historic games where just me and my Loris are up against crazy shit, and every once in a while we could survive. And you realize, like, man, this is one of the best things about Magic the Gathering, is there's all the different axes that you can win the game on, but also just that upper range of stuff. There's almost no limit to how big the game can go. You get these little creature battles, and that little game of chess is still my favorite. But yeah, once it gets up into the stratosphere, it's insane. It's like you really do feel like it's like gods and alternate planes of reality, and it's just shit is happening that should not be happening in this game. It's so crazy. The scope is so huge. But that's all in here, that can happen is so cool. And I could see it from the other side. But now I was able to experience it myself. And I'm like, this is awesome, because I don't have to like turn my back on my religion and just play some creatureless ramp nonsense deck. I'm still playing the creature deck that I like. But really, man, these Nessun Wanderers are my MVP. Because of them, I have the consistent land drops to also be able to put these big haymakers in my deck and play those too. And it's been so cool. And then I heard somebody on a podcast, I think it was the Constructed Resources podcast with Luis Scott Vargas, talking about this thing that had been happening a lot in Standard, where people will ramp toward an emergent ultimatum, is that what it's called? Where you pick 3 cards out of your deck and your opponent has to pick 2 of those 3 and they're gonna happen. And it was in the colors that I was already playing. It was a 7-drop. It's pretty hard to cast because it's 2 blue and 3 green. Like, I think next I need some world trees is what I need to spend my rares on, because that would make it a lot easier to cast. It's very hard to get the mana to cast this thing. But when you do, you can pick Kiora Best the Sea God, which I already had anyway. You can pick a Vorinclex, which doubles the counters on things and has haste. And an Elrod's, what's his name? Elrond's Epiphany, which gives you an extra turn. And basically any combination of those 3 is a huge problem for your opponent. And I was like, hey man, I got these like mythic wild cards. I got like 10 mythic wild cards because I rarely make mythic cards. I think I can do this. Let's just try it. So first I tried it with the Elrond's Epiphany and the Craigplate Baloth, because I already had it in there. I'm like, oh, let's try that and see how it goes. But the Vorinclex really is kind of crucial, because if you combine Vorinclex with Kiara, it skips straight to turn 2 of the saga, so it taps down everyone's creatures immediately. But kind of more importantly, most people are going to pick that you don't get to have the Vorinclex, so you get Kiara and the extra turn. And then effectively that's the same thing. You get to turn 2 of your Kiara right away. So I was like, oh well, fuck it. I got the fucking mythics. Let's just make a stupid Vorinclex. So it's kind of weird because like, I only have 1 copy of all these things in my deck. And if I get the take an extra turn card on its own, that doesn't do me much good because my deck just mostly is little creatures and shit. It's not going to really do that much. And Vorinclex by himself doesn't do me a ton of good. I mean, he's not bad, but he's all right. And if I get the ultimatum without all the other pieces still in my deck, it's not as good either. But I basically just put in a Grim Tutor. And between the 2, it's surprising how often, if we get to that point in the game, either things just line up, or I got the tutor, or I at least get an okay version of that, because I've still got the Baloth in there. I might not get all the stuff that I want. Worst case scenario, I've just got to make one of the 3 choices, like a Demonic Embrace that I put on the Baloth or the Kiora or whatever. But again, it's kind of neat because it's not just crushing. Like these decks that just ramp toward the ultimatum, they've got 4 copies of all the pieces in their deck and they just ramp, try to hit it super fast, blow out the opponent, feels real bad. Where my deck's not going to do this until turn 6 or 7 at the best of times. All the pieces might not line up perfectly. And if they don't, I've still got some like strong cards and some decent stuff. But it's rare for me to just destroy someone's hopes and dreams, you know? Basically, it's so neat that I went through all these different little paths and trails, and I'm just exploring all the different avenues you can go down in Magic, and I come across this deck that just hits so many different aspects of the game that I like. And importantly, it's just fun. It's just fun for me. I really like the early chess game. And then when we get to the end, I like that too, of like, oh man, I got to worry about how I played my mana and what pieces of my haymaker I've even got and what's going to happen. And like, it's just, I feel a lot better about the game playing this deck. However, I get it in my head that it's like, man, I've been on a good run. Things are going really well. Maybe I should go back on this stupid ladder. And I think I'm on platinum. Then what's after that? Like diamond? I mean, I got there before. but it's just, you gotta win so many games in a row, and it's just not realistic. And it's just like, this is just a recipe for me to get angry at this game. It's really a bad idea. I should really just play for fun. Just have fun, play a few games every day, get the fuck out. Hopefully I can keep an evener keel this time. But I don't know, that's the deck. It's fun, it's cool, I like it. I just wanted to blab about it. Oh, the other thing though, that I haven't experimented with a ton, but I think is a cool idea that I also heard on a podcast, is I was always curious about playing limited drafting, but I just spend all my gold on packs because I've just got cards I want for my constructed decks. I just don't have the cash to spread around to play these limited events, because the couple of times I did, I got beat really bad because I'm not good at it. But it seems cool because, you know, that's where the low to the ground chess game that I'm saying I like so much, I mean, that happens there, right? Because you're just playing with random ass fucking common cards and stuff. I was always curious about it. And I heard this great idea that is just to start a second account that's only for that. So I've done that, where I have a second account that all I do is the quick little daily quests. Every day you get 500 or 750 gold. Maybe you win a game or two if you're lucky. But my early, you know, they're just early decks. They're all really bad. But you just do those little quests as quick as you can, mop them up. And then you just spend that gold on playing drafts. And then as long as you win at least a game or two in the draft, you get gems out of that. And yeah, I've been able to play some draft games, and I'm just building up my little gem stuff. Theoretically, if you get good enough that you win over half the time, it just becomes perpetual. Like, you'll win enough to pay for your next draft. I'm not there. I'm quite bad at this. I think what I've learned so far is that when you try to be aggressive with a draft deck, I'm used to just playing quite aggressively. But it's a bad idea. There's definitely games where I had a good board state, and if I had let things play out slower, there's a good chance I would have won. But I pushed it, and something went wrong and I lost, you know? I haven't done much with that yet, but it's just a neat idea. Like, yeah, why not? Why not just start a second account? And instead of spending your gold on packs and wild cards, only spend it on drafts. That's just your draft account. And that's been pretty cool. So, all right, that's how things are going for me in Magic the Gathering. Thanks for listening, you phantom person who may or may not exist. I'll talk to you next time.